Thank you, Secretary Bodman. You know, we heard numerous times today how important it was to have a diversified energy portfolio and to become more efficient and to conserve. And along those lines, I'd just like to say that the flowers that you see today, we're going to conserve them, and they'll be taken to a local hospital and rest homes this evening. And any of the food that is unused today will be taken over to the college and used the rest of the week. So we're trying to practice what we preach. Next, I'd like to introduce Jim Maddox. Jim is a long-term friend of Pete Domenici. He asked to keep his introduction very short, so I'll do that. I just want to relay to you one anecdote that he had the privilege of attending the first Republican meeting in Lee County that had more than 100 Republicans at it, and that event was a fundraiser for Senator Domenici. Jim?
It was 50, not 100. Thank you, Van. I have had the privilege, the real privilege, of knowing Senator Domenici for almost 40 years. My first opportunity to work as a volunteer in a political race after moving to New Mexico in 1970 was a gubernatorial race between Pete Domenici and somebody named Bruce King. Now, David and Mr. Alexander, I was not working in the King campaign in that race. 2 years later, as we all know, Pete Domenici was elected to serve us in the U.S. Senate, and boy, how he has served us. As a first-term senator from New Mexico, he did something very unusual. He broke from his party and worked with the Democratic White House and the Democratic Congress to forge a new energy and natural gas policy. His work led to a new era of deregulation of natural gas and the subsequent unprecedented increase in the supply of natural gas available to consumers. And while the supply increased, the price declined. Can you imagine that, Mr. Gallagher? Imagine that. His policy worked. He took a lot of heat for that effort. His opponent in the next Senate race called him Petro Pete. At the same time, a lot of folks in the oil patch also complained about that legislation, but he knew it was right. Now we look back and see that his work was farsighted and courageous. He continued to lead in the development of energy policy at the national level. He pushed for the Manhattan Project for energy security for our nation more than 3 decades ago, long before the concept became widely accepted. He was a critical force in the 1992 Energy Act, and he literally drafted, as the author, both the Energy Policy Act of 2005, as was referred to in the video, and the Energy Bill of 2006, and worked very hard on a collaborative basis to fashion and pass another energy bill in 2007. As he became and has become one of the foremost energy policy experts in the Senate, he also, in his spare time, took time to chair the Senate Budget Committee and produce the only 2 balanced budgets, federal budgets, in the last half century. He forged a new direction in the care and protection of the mentally ill. He played a critical role in the legislation that was to help a dramatic reduction in nuclear weapons in Russia and the United States, as was referred to just now. And he also protected the military bases in our state when the government wanted to close them down. He enabled the development of WHIP that we all know down in Carlsbad to dispose of nuclear waste. And as many of you know, and a few of you in particular in this room have appreciation of, he laid the groundwork for the new LES plant that's under construction that you heard from Brenda Books about this afternoon. Oh, and in his spare time, he did retain and expand the funding of the basic national security initiative we have, our weapons laboratory. His colleagues have recognized his extraordinary career. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell says that he is one of the 5 most influential and best senators with whom I've ever served. Former Senator Phil Gramm said, "He will go down in history as the best legislator of his generation." The Washington Post, the New York Times, and virtually every other major publication in our country have praised his courage and persistence as a cutting-edge senator. And he's not forgotten us and the very important industry that is so important in New Mexico, the energy industry. As we here today look back on his career, I know all of us are grateful for the leadership he's provided to our state and to our country. We were reminded of the significance of his leadership by all the speakers today. Senator, what a wonderful legacy. What unprecedented service. What a leader. It is my distinct honor to introduce to you our senior senator from New Mexico, my good friend Pete Domenici.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much. Well, with all the good things just said about me and your long applause, maybe I should just call it quits. Yeah. It would be a great evening. But some of you would feel like I cut you short. So I guess I'm going to talk about energy policy a little bit. I can make an observation just at the offset and say that I have come to the conclusion unequivocally that while we are working on the energy crisis, our nation and our nation's leaders have not really decided that we have the kind of crisis that they want to solve and solve quickly. We're going about it in a far too slowpoke way, and I think the people are going to find out before the politicians that much, much more has to be done. Having said that, let's talk a little bit, because energy is a very broad subject, extremely interesting. And you all down here in this corner of the state know something about one aspect of it. But it's just tremendous that Hobbs is the one that put this event on, and that the speakers and the presentations of the day will be typed up and included in a book that will represent the events of this very wonderful symposium. I understand it was financed partially or totally by the state legislature, and that means you've had some of your leadership, put some of your leadership to bear from down here, and I commend you for that. First, I want to thank the New Mexico Center for Energy Policy for hosting this event and for honoring me with this award as we reflect on the theme of today's conference, where our energy policy is going. It is instructive to first examine where it has been. There's a lot we can learn from past decisions as we make choices and today to meet the energy challenges of the future. It is fitting that we hold this event on the Memorial Day weekend. Yesterday, the nation paused from its daily routine to honor our great heroes who gave the ultimate sacrifice defending our nation's freedom. The shared sacrifices of the brave Americans from Bunker Hill to Baghdad has sustained this nation and the liberty and ensured America's survival. The Memorial Day that I was pleased to be with was one where we had Senator John McCain in attendance. As a young man In war, John sacrificed greatly in answering the call to defend the cause of freedom. We owe it to the men and women who we honored yesterday to do something in a real way, in a big way, to address the energy challenge that we face. We owe it to them to reduce the nation's great dependence on foreign oil, which undermines the great sacrifices made by these men and women. Without question, the challenges we face are daunting. Our dependence on foreign oil threatens our economic strength. Now, I'm not just telling you that here today. I have said it now. This will be the fourth time in a major type address, three of them on the floor of the Senate, where I have said that this is a daunting situation. We can't continue to send so much of our hard-earned equity and cash to foreign countries year after year to supply our energy needs. Something will break. Something will go awry. It might be happening already, and we just don't quite know it. That's entirely possible. Without question, I repeat, the challenges that we face are daunting ones. Our dependence on foreign oil threatens our economic strength, our foreign policy, and our national security. We must find a way to meet the rising global demand with an affordable, reliable supply of energy. At the same time, we are faced with the question of how best to address global climate change without damaging our economy. If the energy problem was not daunting enough, you understand that we have tied it all together, and every time we now talk about energy, we must talk, because it is thrust upon us that we must talk about global climate change. And we don't know how to get our commitment going there yet, but our hands are not untied to go after the energy problems. They are tied together. And this, to me, makes it one of the most difficult problems we've ever had. I've been looking for a way to sever the two issues, even as we are presented with a bill next week on global climate change. I've been trying to figure out whether we can break with that and do a bill on energy and say we'll come back to that, or it'll vest and come into existence 10 or 15 years from now, while we have that longer period to begin to solve our energy crisis. But I don't think there's enough votes for that. That's a little too far out, but it does make a point. As we face these growing concerns, we also find that our nation, its dollar is falling. That's staggering. Rising commodity prices. We are told that too is another issue of supply and demand. While ethanol has paid a little bit, is responsible for a little bit of that. Most of it is that this new growing world that is upon us, led by China, they've decided to eat better. And you probably found that you've seen on the news where they let it out of there, where they have meat counters in Beijing, where people are shopping and they want beef, just like we have beef. Well, that's a brand new demand of large proportions, and it is occurring everywhere. Simply put, these are challenges of a generation, and they are without precedent. Our biggest obstacle may prove to be the most fundamental. Our conventional thinking today is inadequate to achieve what we must. To resolve our energy challenge, it will take a reversal of thinking that in the 1970s brought a president to halt efforts to reprocess spent nuclear fuel. Just because that policy was put on America by a president does not mean it's right, does not mean it must stay. As a matter of fact, it must be lifted, and it has been. It will take a reversal of the thinking that caused the Congress in the early 1980s to systematically prevent the exploration of our deep sea resources. Many of you are fully aware that America is not is not exploring our deep sea resources except in one area off our coast of Louisiana and Texas and a little piece of Florida. The rest of it across our country has a legislative and an executive moratorium. We have just unilaterally, each body and then the executive said, in times of abundance, we'll close this, and we can't get it off. It stays there. I believe it is absolutely imperative that in short order we pass legislation removing the moratoria and letting America go to work maybe 50 miles out so that it's away from everyone on this rather significant resource. We don't even have the money, and we can't get it in a vote on the floor to inventory these assets, as if somebody's afraid if we find out how big it is that it'll permit us to go out there and look for it. So we're just using the best guess we can, and we know it is very big. It is monumental. It will take a reversal of thinking that caused the president in 1980s to veto a bill that would have opened ANWR for development of American oil. Now, I'm not sure in this room that you are all for this, but sooner or later, I don't know how high the price must be. I don't know what will break, what will fall apart in the American economic system for us to come to the conclusion that that is our oil and the 2,000-acre footprint in 19 million acres of wilderness can hardly be found, much less being an environmentally dangerous footprint for that wilderness. And it will take a reversal of thinking from just a few weeks ago that led a congressional committee to delay the commercialization of one of America's most abundant natural resources, oil shale. I understand that through good fortune of the planning that went into this meeting, you heard one of our Department of Energy experts talk about oil shale. I'm sure that some of you, in disbelief, are saying this can't be true, that America owns a resource situate in 3 states and I guess a little small part in another state. It's a rock. I've seen it. I've been up there. But in it, it's loaded with oil, just like across the continent over in Canada. They've taken what they have. What they have is gooey oil that runs around, and they've decided they're going to clean that up and process it, and lo and behold, they are, and every bit of it has been determined to be a valid oil reserve. They went from a country with no reserves to being a country with the second largest reserves in the world, because they are now prepared to produce that tar sands into oil, and it's then used by them, and believe it or not, by us, for they are now our biggest importer. We buy more of that from them than any other country. Now, I can tell you this, and I can tell you that it is true, and I can tell you we should do something about it, but I want you to know that it's going to be very, very hard. This will be a hard-fought environmental issue, and I, for one, believe it is time to draw the line. Environmentalists have to be for America also, and in this case, we wouldn't have to mine and turn much of it into oil to change the world. If we just let us prove it and produce some, the world will know that the great nation has come to life again. And the world will say they are actually going to produce, for a change, some of that which they have. And believe you me, they know about our oil shale, just like they know about the tar sands of Canada. Now, I was telling you that we had to reverse the thinking. A congressional committee put a moratorium on the second round of rules that are to be produced by the Shell Oil Company, who is attempting to prove up a license and a patent so they can show us how to produce shale into oil. And after they get it going, a subcommittee of the United States Senate in the morning hours with no one around put a moratorium and said you must stop. Now, we tried to change that, and I regret to tell you that as much as I argued it more passionately and with more accuracy than I'm arguing it here tonight with you, and the vote was a wonderful vote. The problem is there are too few Republicans. It was party line. And one Democrat that voted against us stood up and said, the argument that you've made cannot be denied. But I promised Senator so-and-so in our caucus I would vote with him, and I do that now, but I will vote with you, pointing to me, when it comes to the floor. Well, that's a lot more difficult. It would have been wonderful had we got it out of committee, and somebody would have had to defeat it. Just this past week, and this may not have been spoken of today, so it certainly demands being in this record. The Wall Street Journal reported some alarming news for those of you and those of us who are increasingly concerned about global oil supply demand imbalance. Oil supply imbalance. We already know that the developing countries in this world will continue their thirst for oil. As economies like China and India grow at double digits, that pace will continue. However, this news account gave a growing pessimistic view about future supplies of oil around the world. The IEA, International Energy Agency, is the comprehensive approach that they take is to assess the world's top 400 oil fields, and although the final report is not expected until November, the top economist at the agency reports, quote, a dangerous situation. I believe the computer modeling of major oil fields from Mexico to Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and to Iraq will show a crimped supply into the future, while estimates from the agency point to a demand topping 116 million barrels a day by 2030. Aging oil fields and diminished investment could mean a struggle to surpass production of over 100 million barrels a day over the next 2 decades. Such estimates have led one premier Wall Street firm to forecast possible $200 price per barrel next year. Now, I don't know that that'll happen, but what I am telling you is that things are not getting better in the world arena, they're getting worse. And I don't think America can just sit by and say, we are doing things. We are doing things. We're doing some great things. We accomplished some marvelous changes in the law in the 3 bills alluded to by the Secretary. Big changes. A renaissance in nuclear power is upon us. But it takes 42 months to approve a license because of what we have imposed on the nuclear industry because of our fears of the past. In order to get cleared and not get stopped by a court, it takes that much time, even with modern technology. While some of these estimates are years in the future, we know that the following today: demand is up and supply is not keeping pace. Prices are up and family budgets are not keeping pace. Imports are up and America's oil is not keeping pace. The public demands action and Congress is not keeping pace. All of these facts are declarations that inform us that in the short term we must produce more energy here at home. And I believe we have been misled on this ourselves, because we were sort of saying, don't worry about the short term. But it turns out the short term at this rate is very apt to ruin the American economy before we get to the long term. The economy is having enormous problems. And I venture to say nobody on the economic front can tell you why. They have all kinds of themes, and if you read the chairman of the Federal Reserve's book, he has all kinds of warnings, but I don't believe anybody is pinning it on the price of oil, but I am. I do believe it's having the biggest negative impact on the American economy is coming from $600 billion a year that we must send elsewhere just to buy the crude oil to operate our automobiles, trucks, and other things day in and day out. Now let me be clear. Our deep dependence on foreign oil is irreparably harming our economic strength, our global competitiveness. Year after year, you hear policymakers talk about energy independence. But year after year, we consume more and produce less here at home. Today, all imports account for over 60% of our total supply. We can all remember the day that we were well up to 50. We were at 35 and 40, and we thought there was room to save us from this dependence. But look what's upon us now, 60 and growing. I commend the efforts of those who suggest, some are, a new Manhattan Project or an Apollo program to strengthen our energy security. But this challenge is different, and things have to be adjusted to it. Perhaps it's greater than those of the past years. This time, we do not seek a one-time goal to develop the first atom bomb or to land the first man on the moon. Instead, we seek a fundamental, long-term, long-lasting shift in how our nation powers its economy. To start with, we can move toward producing coal to liquids for aviation and diesel fuel. America also owns huge quantities of coal. Some of it is relatively clean, some is dirty. Maybe you didn't get a presentation on it, but we have a mother lode of coal. And we are not hearing any suggestions about solving our energy crisis with coal, plain and simple, because we don't know how to use it without producing CO2. When the combustion occurs, CO2 arrives on the scene. And we do not have the technology or science to separate out the CO2, carbon dioxide. So it's obvious to me we must move toward, without any hesitation, toward a major project with major funding, with a goal, maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 years from now, to solve the riddle of carbon dioxide upon combustion and find a way to separate that out. At the same time, we can move toward commercial leasing of oil shale and make robust investments in advanced batteries for cars. That's one thing we can do pretty short term, is to increase the battery, the power of batteries, so that we can all begin to look with some degree of earnestness at the plug-in automobile. If you can get 100 miles before you have to get plugged in again, that'll be a big user for many Americans. And again, we will not be using new electricity because we use it at night when things are turned down. But eventually it will catch up and we'll have to produce more electricity, and we'll be with another problem, the problem of climate change and CO2. So everywhere we turn, it seems that your senator is telling you about a problem, right? And it seems like he's suggesting we don't have a solution. I don't want to leave that impression with you. Because it's obvious that we can work toward fuel recycling as we generate more nuclear power. So that's another thing we should do. The French know how to recycle spent fuel. It isn't like something we have to invent. But we have people telling us we have to go through all this process. I have a bill, and I'm going to push it hard soon, that just says we're going to jump right into the fray, and we're going to produce recycling on an individual basis. The United States is going to set it up for companies to bid on it, and then the companies will have the assurance of the government that if they succeed, they will be able to sell it in order to pay off the bonds or indebtedness that they will use to build it. We think it's filled with propriety and common sense and doability. It's just that for some reason we have more and more senators willing to support nuclear power. But when you get to recycling, something happens. There's a backup. I didn't know it was there, but it is, and I haven't gotten to the point of finding out why. But recycling may have more trouble than it should. People used to say no recycling because in the process you produce some bad players for the building of weapons. But look, if we can't be trusted to take care of that bad stuff, and France is, as we produce recycling, who in the world is, and when are we going to do it? I believe we have to be prudent and fair about that, not just arbitrary and single-minded. Those of us in Congress share a common goal to reduce our dependence on foreign oil, but there are deep divisions over how to achieve it, how soon it must be done. Last year, the majority in Congress passed an omnibus appropriation bill with several damaging provisions that were inserted without notice or debate. Among these are a moratorium on shale, which I have told you about. 3 western states are the home of all of this shale oil rock that you heard about, which is a bigger reserve than the reserves of Saudi Arabia. And unfortunately, that will not happen yet, moving ahead rapidly with oil shale. Last week, an amendment to repeal this moratorium was defeated on a straight party vote. I told you that. I think it's time that we get this better known by the public, and we won't have such votes if they understood that therein lies the possibility of us sending a signal to the world that we're going to produce enough of our own oil to at least balance this problem of the amount that's needed and the amount produced. We could be the balancer there, and price wouldn't have to go up so much. That's the kind of thing we're going to have to do. Unfortunately, things are moving slowly. I don't know if any of you have witnessed or seen one of these large offshore platforms that our oil companies build in the deep waters offshore. They are as safe as can be. They could be off the shore of any state, and the state need not worry. The way I solved it and got it passed once was to give the adjoining states a larger cut in the royalties in exchange for lifting the moratorium. And they are thrilled. They get 37% instead of something like 6 or 7%. We weren't going to get any new royalties anyway, any new revenue, because we weren't doing anything. So I figured the best thing to do was to give some up to get something back. And we did, and we have some giant new wells are going to be drilled, but you've got to be doing more of that every month, not just one time and wait 3 years for another chance. This morning, the price of oil was $130 a barrel. The average price at the pump was about $4, or if it isn't there, it was getting there. These costs are negatively impacting our family budgets. You know that, and I know that. It's going to be worse this year when we look at the things that we use discretionary money for, that made money for business people and other things. The discretionary money for vacations and the like is going to be cut back. I don't mean to sound negative about everything, but actually the airlines are in big trouble. I don't know which one is going to come to us first to be bailed out. I'm sure that we'll have to do those who come after me will have to do some real thinking before this thing gets solved. Now, I want to close by reminding you that we've done a couple of big things. One was the CAFE standards. We've been looking at the automobile CAFE standards for 15 years. We never could get a vote to change them. Last year we did. We changed that to a new CAFE standard, which by the year 2020, the amount of oil imported to use for transportation will start to bend downward. But understand, that's a long time from now, and it just starts to bend down. It isn't over with. It has to come all the way down. So 30 to 35 years, you will have a big impact, maybe 1 million barrels a day from just that one vote. That's big, that's powerful. Despite these recent achievements, it will take many years for them to come into effect. we are moving ahead with another kind of ethanol, so we won't be using much more corn. Cellulosic ethanol was in the same bill with CAFE standards, and we passed it, and we set a new standard, and it can indeed be producing up to 16 billion gallons of cellulosic ethanol by 2022. But here are these dates. You pass the law, you get it going, but it won't be ready till 2022. But it will be. That will be one. Not as good for us as it is for some of the Central American countries. They have some of these weeds that they use. For us, we have a lot of trouble because when we want to clean up forests or go in where forests have been burned and clean them up, the environmentalists have won in getting through the courts and getting us to stop that for fear that we are illegally cutting timber. And so that's been a stymie in terms of the product we could use for that kind of activity. Now I'm getting close, and you're obviously getting close. I'm getting close to being tired and worn out, and you're getting very sleepy. And so it would seem to me that says it's time for us to do something else. And that's what we're going to do. I'm going to say one more time, thank you very, very much. You all speak too much of my accomplishments. We have to close this and make a loop out of it so everybody will get it right. I am very lucky. Whatever gifts I got from the Almighty, one of them is that people love to work with me. Some people call that leadership. I don't know. But I do have great people working for me over my 33 years. All of these people at the university level who are so much smarter than most of us will have to attest that when they come to our office in the past 25 years or so, they always find their equal. If we're talking about nuclear power, we have their equal. Now, not right now, because you understand I'm having to clear out my office, and I have a very small staff, because that's the way the Senate does it as you leave. You don't keep everything right up to the end. You sort of phase it out. So I'm beginning to feel like somebody who's phased out. But I won't forget that it's people that make success. Up the road there we have Carlsbad, and what a success we had when we got WHIP. That was local leadership personified. I was just privileged to be there for the ride. But what a tremendous local leadership we saw there. When we put together the package for LES, what tremendous leadership joined together between you and Carlsbad to get that done. Everywhere we look, we had somebody helping. James Baker, former Secretary of the Treasury, he was my personal helper when we got the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. But preceding it, three businessmen bought that college campus in order to turn it into something for their community. And they said, we'll sell it to the government at what we paid for it. It was such a small price, I don't even remember it. But they did do that, and we did find a way to hook James Baker into letting us do it. He was secretary, and we put it under his jurisdiction. That's how we got him. He thought I was going to put it under somebody else. That made him very mad. So when I told him I wasn't going to do that, he was very happy. He was ready to give me the world. I didn't need the world. I just needed the first 25 million to buy those buildings. And that all worked out pretty well. So wherever we go, there's something like that happening. I do want to say in this room are many people that have their role in this United States and her problems. And most of you are terrifically loyal Americans. As I worked with you over the years, it was always a privilege to come down to an event and watch you get enthused and applaud and be happy when we talked about our government doing something good or something good happening. I did tell you tonight the best I could without just dumping all over you and all over America, which I might have to do before I leave. I might have to tell it a little more boldly. But I think you got the message. We got a long way to go, and things are really all touched by energy. America is touched by energy at every level. That's why we use so much. We can use less, but make no bones about it, we use 1/3 of the world's energy because we need it for our lifestyle and what we do and how we live. So it's not easy to change that. And we're being told we got to change it. And you know, it's hard to legislate that, isn't it? You all don't like that very much. I mean, if you had to vote on that cafe standard, you'd have a hell of a time. Because all these big pickup trucks and all that, all going to get changed, you know. So we just had one big vote and left it up to somebody else. No, that's true. That didn't violate any rule. We just have to do it that way. And somebody administratively has to do that. And they're going to do it, and you're going to be gradually, you know, graduatedly mad. Not all mad at once. Thank you very much. Great to be with you.
Wait just a minute. We have Senator, I can't think of a better recipient of this, but on behalf of the New Mexico Energy Policy Institute, we'd like to present you with our very first Leadership Award.
Wow. Thank you.
Well, that concludes today's events. I'd like to thank all of you for your participation. As the Senator said, we will be documenting today's proceedings, and we'll have those available for those of you who would like them. And we'll also be sending them off to our elected officials, both here in Washington and in Santa Fe. Thank you all very much, and have a good night.